Some lines aren't meant to be crossed, but when her eyes met mine, I knew resisting would cost me more than surrendering ever could. It started quietly, almost by accident, the way meaningful stories often do. I wasn't looking for her, and she wasn't expecting me. The setting was ordinary on the surface, a late afternoon gathering in a quiet suburban home, the kind where neighbors drift in and out, voices hum in the background, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingles with the faint perfume of garden flowers carried in by the open windows. Yet something in the air that day felt charged, as if time itself slowed in anticipation of something I hadn't yet recognized. I was standing near the bookshelf, thumbing through titles I barely paid attention to, when I felt it, that subtle shift, the unspoken awareness that someone had stepped into the room. My eyes lifted, and that's when I saw her. A woman of around 40, poised yet unassuming, carrying herself with a grace that wasn't rehearsed but lived. Her dark hair was loosely pinned back, a few strands falling across her cheek, softening the strength of her features. She wore a simple ivory blouse tucked into slate-gray trousers, nothing extravagant, but the way she filled the space made the ordinary shimmer with quiet elegance. I don't think she noticed me at first. She was focused on finding a place to set down a tray she carried, lined with teacups that clinked faintly against one another. I studied the small, deliberate movements of her hands, steady but careful, as though she was always mindful not to disturb the world around her. When her gaze finally lifted, it landed on me for just a second too long. And in that second, everything shifted. Her eyes, calm but touched with a guarded warmth, met mine, and I felt as though I'd been seen in a way I couldn't explain. Not like the casual glances I was used to, but deeper, more deliberate, as if she was searching for something beneath the surface of me. I tried to look away, to return to the safety of the books, but my body betrayed me, my shoulders squared unconsciously, my breath caught, and I found myself standing a little straighter, as though her presence alone demanded honesty from me. I offered a polite smile, the kind you give when words feel unnecessary but silence feels too heavy. She returned it, but hers was slower, edged with something thoughtful, almost reluctant. That smile lingered, though, and in its lingering I felt both invited and warned. She wasn't someone to be approached carelessly. The conversation, when it finally came, was brief. Something about the books, about whether I'd read the one in my hand. But the words hardly mattered. What mattered was the cadence of her voice, low, steady, carrying years of experience, a softness wrapped around strength. I felt small beside it, not in a diminished way, but in a way that made me aware of my youth, my uncertainty, my hunger for understanding. By the time she turned away, the room felt different. I could still hear her voice, still feel the weight of her glance, as though she'd left behind something intangible, a shadow of herself in the air between us. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a quiet pull in my chest, not desire, not yet, but recognition. Recognition of a connection that, however fragile, had already begun to take root. The next time I saw her, the air felt less accidental. It wasn't in passing or in a crowded room. It was quieter, smaller, almost as though the world itself wanted to narrow down until it was just the two of us. She was standing by the garden door, evening light spilling across her shoulders, tracing soft gold against the fabric of her blouse. The house had thinned of people, laughter drifting faintly from another room, leaving behind this still pocket of calm where she lingered. I hesitated at first. Something about her presence carried both warmth and distance, like sunlight seen through glass. You could feel its heat, admire its glow, but you knew it wasn't yours to claim. Still, I found myself walking closer, drawn not by boldness but by something quieter, the kind of pull that doesn't ask permission because it doesn't need to. She turned as I approached, her eyes meeting mine with that same deliberate calm I'd noticed before. "You're quieter than most," she said, her tone almost teasing but softened by curiosity. I shrugged lightly, smiling in the way you do when you're half caught, half exposed. "I guess I prefer listening," I admitted. "People tell you more that way." Her lips curved at the corner, a hint of amusement flashing through. "And what have you heard tonight?" she asked, tilting her head just enough for the light to catch the faint lines near her eyes, the kind etched not by age but by years of laughter, resilience, and life fully lived. Mostly, I said carefully, that everyone's trying a little too hard to be interesting. Her laugh came quietly, low and rich, as though it slipped past her guard without permission. The sound warmed something in me I didn't realize had grown cold. She leaned slightly against the doorframe, her arms folding loosely, the kind of stance that suggested comfort but also control. "And you? Do you try to be interesting?" The question landed heavier than her tone suggested. I shook my head. "I think I'm just trying to be honest." Her eyes lingered on me then, long enough to stir something unsteady inside. Not flirtation, not yet. More like she was measuring the weight of my answer against the weight of her own thoughts. There was a silence between us, but it wasn't empty. It was full, charged with all the words we didn't say, all the questions neither of us dared to ask yet. I wanted to reach out, not with my hands, but with something deeper, something that could bridge the years between us. Instead, I leaned slightly on the wall opposite hers, mirroring her stance without meaning to. The closeness was subtle, a careful negotiation of distance, but enough for me to notice the faint scent of her perfume, something floral with an earthy undertone, grounding yet quietly intoxicating. We talked about nothing and everything, books, music, the way the city felt different at night. Each word was simple, but the pauses carried weight, as if both of us knew this wasn't small talk. This was something else. Something that wanted to stretch beyond the moment. And when someone called her name from across the room, she straightened, her gaze holding mine for a fraction longer than necessary. It wasn't a promise, not yet, but it was a spark, the kind that lights slowly, deliberately, and refuses to be ignored once it begins. The third time we spoke, it wasn't in a room full of people, and it wasn't by chance. It happened in the quiet after everyone had left, when the noise of the evening gave way to silence. I had lingered behind, helping stack chairs and gather empty glasses, when I found her in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, rinsing dishes under the warm stream of water. It felt strange, almost surreal, to see her there, someone so composed, so untouchable in the public eye, reduced to the simple act of washing a plate. Yet there was something grounding about it, something that reminded me she wasn't unreachable after all. "Let me help," I offered, stepping forward before she could object. She glanced at me, half amused, half skeptical, her dark eyes flickering with a question she didn't voice. But she handed me a dish towel anyway, and just like that, I was beside her. The space between us was narrow, the kitchen small, and every movement felt heightened. The brush of her arm as she passed me a plate, the warmth of her presence so close I could feel it before I even looked at her. My heart beat faster, not because of anything grand or obvious, but because of the ordinariness of it, two people sharing a quiet task, their silence speaking louder than words. "You don't have to stay," she said finally, her voice low, almost hesitant. "I don't mind," I replied, drying a glass, careful not to look at her too long. "Sometimes the best parts of the night happen when everyone else is gone." She stilled for a moment, her hands pausing under the running water. When she turned her head toward me, there was a softness in her expression I hadn't seen before. Vulnerability, maybe. Or perhaps recognition, that I wasn't here because I had to be, but because I wanted to be. Our conversation started with the usual, work, places we traveled, the books we couldn't finish, but it drifted quickly into deeper waters. She told me about how quiet the house felt once everyone left, about how she'd learned to find comfort in solitude. I listened, not with the intent to answer, but with the intent to understand. And in those moments, I realized just how much she carried beneath her graceful exterior, years of experience, unspoken aches, and the kind of wisdom you only earn by living fully. At one point, she brushed a strand of damp hair back from her forehead, her elbow grazing mine. The touch was fleeting, unintentional, but it lingered in the air between us. My breath hitched, and I forced myself not to move, not to ruin the delicacy of what had just passed. By the time the last dish was set aside, the silence between us had changed. It wasn't heavy, and it wasn't awkward. It was alive, filled with the unspoken acknowledgement that something was forming here, fragile, unplanned, and quietly powerful. When I finally stepped back, drying my hands on the towel, she gave me a look that stopped me in my tracks. Not a smile, not a command. Just a look that said, "I see you. I don't know why you're here, but I feel it too." And in that moment, I knew the pull wasn't mine alone. It was late when I saw her again, later than usual. The evening had stretched on, and most people had already gone. The house was dim now, the glow of a few scattered lamps casting soft shadows along the walls. She was in the living room, seated on the edge of the sofa, a glass of wine resting loosely in her hand. Her posture was relaxed, but her eyes told a different story. I hovered in the doorway for a moment, unsure if I should intrude. But she noticed me almost immediately. "You're still here," she said, her tone even, but her voice carried a subtle weight, as if the fact surprised her, maybe even unsettled her. "I didn't feel like leaving yet," I admitted, stepping closer. "The night feels unfinished." Her lips pressed together faintly, not in disapproval but in contemplation. She gestured toward the empty chair beside her. I took it without hesitation, though the closeness felt different now, charged, as though every inch of space between us mattered. For a while, neither of us spoke. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator down the hall, the ticking of a clock somewhere out of sight. The silence was dense, filled with all the questions neither of us dared to voice. Finally, she broke it. "You're young," she said quietly, almost to herself. Her gaze stayed fixed on the glass in her hand, swirling the deep red liquid slowly. I felt the words hit me with the weight of truth, not an insult, not dismissal, but an acknowledgement. "And you're not," I replied softly, my tone careful, respectful. Her head turned then, eyes locking with mine, sharp and unguarded. For a fleeting moment, I thought she'd pull back, laugh it off, change the subject. But she didn't. Instead, she exhaled, her shoulders sinking slightly. "You don't know what you're doing," she murmured. "Maybe not," I admitted. "But I know how it feels when I'm near you. And I know I don't want to ignore it." Her eyes softened, but not with surrender. With conflict. I could see it, the battle within her, the walls she had built to keep moments like this at bay. She turned her gaze away, staring into the distance, as though the answers might be hidden in the shadows of the room. I didn't touch her. I didn't lean closer. I only let the words hang in the air, giving her the space to breathe, to decide. Because this wasn't about rushing, it never had been. This was about letting something fragile unfold in its own time. She finally set her glass down, her hands resting loosely in her lap. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, tinged with something raw. "You shouldn't make me feel like this," she whispered. I swallowed hard, my chest tightening at the confession. "Maybe I can't help it," I said, my words barely audible. Her eyes flickered toward me once more, and in that lingering glance was everything, the warning, the longing, the hesitation that both bound us and drew us closer. It wasn't a beginning, not yet. But it was the undeniable truth, we were already standing on a line neither of us knew how to step back from. The weight of our unspoken tension reached its peak on a night that seemed ordinary at first. A soft rain had begun to fall outside, tapping against the windows in a steady rhythm, filling the house with a hush that made every breath, every movement, feel amplified. She was gathering her things to leave when the storm suddenly deepened, sheets of rain cascading across the glass, thunder rolling in the distance. She sighed, glancing at the door with hesitation. "It's impossible to drive in this," she murmured, half to herself. Without thinking, I said, "Stay until it eases. At least for a while." She paused, her hand still clutching her bag strap, her eyes meeting mine. There was a flicker of resistance there, the reminder of all the reasons she shouldn't. But the storm outside made the world feel small, cut off, and in that isolation the distance between us shrank further. Slowly, she let the bag slip from her shoulder and settled back into the room. We ended up sitting together by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. The lamp cast a soft golden halo around her, tracing the curve of her profile, the delicate slope of her neck. She looked beautiful, not in a loud or obvious way, but in the quiet stillness of someone caught between strength and surrender. Our conversation wandered gently, circling safer topics at first. But the pauses grew longer, heavier, until words felt unnecessary. At one point, she tucked her hair behind her ear, and I caught myself staring, caught in the delicate rhythm of her movements. She noticed. Her eyes lingered on mine, steady this time, unflinching. The silence swelled, thick with everything we hadn't said. My hand twitched, the urge to reach for hers almost overwhelming. And then, without planning it, I did, my fingers brushing lightly against the back of her hand resting on the sofa. She didn't pull away. She didn't move at all. Her breath caught, her lips parting just slightly, and for a single suspended heartbeat, the entire world seemed to still. I could feel the warmth of her skin, the faint tremor beneath her composure, and it was enough to undo me. But then, just as suddenly, she exhaled and shifted slightly, not breaking the contact entirely, but enough to draw a boundary. "This is dangerous," she whispered, her voice almost breaking. "I know," I said softly. My thumb grazed her hand once before I withdrew. The moment passed, but the air remained electric, alive with what almost was. We didn't speak of it again that night. But we both knew, the line had been touched, and nothing would ever feel the same after it. The rain had ended by morning, but the storm between us hadn't. Days passed, and though we tried to carry on as if nothing had shifted, the truth lingered in every glance, every pause that stretched too long. I told myself to keep distance, to let it fade, but instead, I found myself drawn back to her house one quiet evening, as if the pull between us had become its own gravity. She was in the garden when I arrived, pruning the last of the late blooms before the season ended. The sky was turning violet with dusk, a soft wind rustling the leaves, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and roses. I stood there for a moment, watching her, realizing how deeply she'd woven herself into my thoughts, into the rhythm of my days. When she noticed me, there was no surprise, only a long, steady look. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly, though her voice lacked conviction. "I know," I admitted, stepping closer. "But I couldn't stay away." She set the shears down slowly, her hands brushing the petals as if searching for steadiness. "You're making this harder than it already is." "Harder for who?" I asked, my voice lower now. "For you." "For me." "Because I've been trying to fight this, and it feels like fighting myself." Her gaze flickered, and for a moment I thought she'd retreat again. But instead, she exhaled, her composure faltering. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I've built my life carefully, piece by piece. I can't afford to let it unravel because of this." I took another step forward, close enough now to see the tension in her shoulders, the faint tremor in her hands. Gently, I reached out, not to claim her but to steady her, my fingers brushing against her wrist. She didn't pull away. "I don't want to unravel your life," I said quietly. "I just want to be in it. Even if it's complicated. Even if it scares you." Her eyes lifted to mine, and in them I saw it, the fear, yes, but also the longing she had been hiding, the ache she hadn't allowed herself to name. She searched my face as though weighing every risk, every possibility, until at last, something broke free inside her. Her hand turned, fingers curling into mine, a small, deliberate act that carried the weight of everything we'd been holding back. Her voice was barely audible, trembling but certain. "I don't know if I can do this, but I don't want to let you go." In that single confession, the wall between us cracked, and the truth spilled out, fragile, imperfect, but real. The garden grew still around us after her confession, the fading twilight holding its breath as if the world itself understood the weight of what had just been spoken. I didn't rush to answer, didn't tighten my grip on her hand. I simply let it rest there, warm against mine, giving her the space to breathe inside her own admission. For a long while, we stood in silence, the air cool against our skin, the last streaks of sunset painting her face in shades of gold and shadow. She looked at me as though she wanted to say more but couldn't find the words, and maybe that was enough. Sometimes, presence spoke louder than language ever could. Finally, I said softly, "We don't have to figure it all out tonight. We just have to decide if this," I gestured between us, to the fragile thread binding our hands together, "is worth holding on to." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, bittersweet but real. "You make it sound simple," she whispered. "Maybe it is," I replied. "Not easy, but simple." That earned me a small laugh, the kind that slipped out when the weight begins to lift. She shook her head, her hair brushing across her cheek, and I reached up without thinking, tucking the stray strand gently behind her ear. My fingertips lingered just long enough to feel the warmth of her skin before pulling back. She didn't flinch, didn't retreat. Instead, she leaned slightly into the touch, a quiet acceptance that spoke louder than any promise. We moved to the patio and sat together, not side by side but close enough for our shoulders to brush. The night air carried the scent of damp earth from the earlier rain, the crickets humming low in the background. She wrapped her arms loosely around herself, and I draped the light throw from the chair over her shoulders. Without hesitation, she shifted, letting part of it fall across me too. That simple act, sharing the space, sharing the warmth, felt more intimate than anything we had yet dared. Our conversation that night wasn't about fears or obstacles. It was about music, about childhood memories, about the little things that made us who we were. And yet, beneath every word was the unspoken truth: we had chosen this. We had chosen to stop resisting what was already here. When the evening grew colder and I stood to leave, she didn't let go of my hand immediately. Her eyes held mine, steady and unguarded. "Stay," she said softly, the word carrying no hesitation this time. And in that moment, all the tension, all the hesitation of before, melted into something tender and undeniable. It wasn't about crossing boundaries or rushing toward desire. It was about finding safety in each other, about allowing ourselves to exist in the same fragile, beautiful truth. We had stepped past fear. And at last, we were standing together.